Copes, it's amazing the gravitas that we've had in the cyber world out there with people jumping on board in our podcast and
famous people, Drewy, famous
very,
people.
very famous and successful people. And when it comes to little podcast shows, one of the people that we look up to is the great Lee Ellis, because he has gone from Wayne's World type stuff to full-blown ESPN and now doing some very sharp work on a program called No Dunks. And I speak of a great Australian export, and it's Leigh Ellis. Lee, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me, guys. This is a thrill for me. You guys probably don't remember, but you came to Sunbury one time in 1989, and I was in the stands watching you guys. So,
really,
you know, for me to be here with you now is quite a thrill.
Well, I guess that's all part of it because let's be honest, Sunbury's not quite the mecca of Australian hoops.
Hey, I coached at Sunbury.
You did, calm down. And they had some very good facility development down there. But like I say, they're kind of an emerging association. How does an Australian kid, clearly with a passion for basketball, go from Sunbury all the way to the States, very much ingrained into the powerful NBA fraternity and doing some amazing work on television and online?
Well, I guess, you know, I started just growing up in a basketball family. My dad and my two older brothers played, so I just sort of followed their path and I started playing. And pretty quickly, I was interested in basketball. And then when I was in grade 6, I think I was about 11 or 12 years old, my brother, who's 3 or 4 years older than me, he came home with a video cassette of the 1987 All-Star game. And I don't know if you guys know that one at all, but it's the one where Rolando Blackman hits the 2 free throws, time expired.
Right.
And
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and the West go on to win the game in overtime. Now, I was, you know, like I say, 11 or 12 at the time, and I thought I was into wrestling, the WWF, Hulk Hogan and Macho Man and all that. And I thought, well, this is kind of rigged as well, you know, because it's like the guy hitting the 2 free throws to send the game to overtime and then they win it. And I was just captivated by that moment. But, of course, this is the late 80s, so we didn't have cable TV. We didn't have the internet. It was very, very hard to get hold of NBA games. Yes. And so I survived off getting the magazine, the Hoop magazine and the Basketball Digest from the local newsagents. And then slowly into the, you know, early 90s, we started getting NBA action. And then Channel 10, I think, or the ABC had the game a week.
Yep.
And then Channel 10 got it. They had Inside Stuff and they had NBA action. So we started getting more and more of it. And I was just in love with the game. But of course, Andrew, as well, you know, from the 89 NCAA tournament run that you guys went on, that was huge for Australian basketball because those games were being beamed live into Australia. And people, I think we took a day off school, although, you know, I can't remember exactly what it was. But, you know, because you guys went on that Cinderella run. And, and I mean, talk about free throws, you know, you guys nearly pulled the whole thing off. And
Ramil Robinson,
that's right.
In one of the most gut-wrenching and dubious calls in the history of NCAA finals.
Yeah, I know. It was crazy. And the fact that you had such a prominent role on the team, I think, was just incredible for Basketball Australia. So, you know, for a kid like me, you know, I was obviously into footy and cricket and things like that as well. But basketball had a different pull. And so I used to start writing letters to the NBA and to all the teams, and occasionally they would write back. And man, when someone wrote back and sent me a poster or some photos or cards or whatever, that to me was better than Christmas. And I wrote a couple of letters actually to the NBA head office as well. And one came back, and you know, we lost David Stern this year. And one of the letters said, David Stern wanted me to reply to your letter, and I kept that letter. And
wow.
You know, so when you're a kid and you get that recognition from the league that you love on the other side of the world, you know, you're reading about it, it just, all that does is fuel your drive even more so. And then, of course, with the Bulls taking over in the 90s, like in basketball really grew, it exploded, and we started getting more and more of it. It was just incredible. And so later in life, you know, as I got older and I moved on, I went and lived in London for a while. Then I moved to Canada. I lived in Toronto for a while. Then I went back to London, then I went back to Canada, and I went back to Canada in 2006, and I was like, I'm here for the 1-year working holiday visa, and then I'm going back to Australia. And about 6 weeks or so after I was there, I met a girl, and and I thought, well, you know
one
what?
Of many, I imagine.
The thing was, it wasn't one of many because she turned into my wife, and we got married in Toronto, and so we stayed in Toronto. And then I needed a job. I had no money, had no career. Like, I wasn't bringing a whole lot to the table, let's be honest. But as it turned out, a year or so later, this sports journalism school opened in Toronto. And I was like, well, this is what I got to do. I got to try something here.
Yeah.
And so I applied for the school, and it wasn't cheap either. It was like incredibly expensive, but my wife was very supportive. She's like, listen, this is your passion, go and do it. And so I tried.
Well.
I married incredibly well. And so while I was there, I got this internship at a sports TV station in Canada. And while I was doing that internship, things worked out and they offered me a job. So I took it. And then this basketball podcast called The Basketball Jones, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, it was one of the very first, if not the first, real sort of daily podcast. So those guys were from Toronto. I thought they were some, hot shots from New York or LA, really, because, they were really good at what they were doing, but they were from Toronto, and they started working at the Score. And so I was kind of like, well, I've got to somehow make myself known to these guys. So they were working in a different office, and I would walk past every now and again, just accidentally. Oh, hey guys, hey, did you see?
Really? You got Aussie accent, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I say, oh, do you know this? And they kind of like, yeah, whatever, go away. But the irony is, the funniest thing is, in the NBA lockout in 2011, these guys were full-time employees and there was no basketball, and they somehow convinced the bosses at the Score. They said, listen, there's no basketball, but let's take basketball to the people. And they convinced the bosses to go on this 5-week trip around the US where they would do live podcasts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what, how the hell do you convince, sell that to your bosses? And the bosses were like, yeah, go for it. That sounds like a great idea. And there was 5 of them at the time. And they said to me one time, I was just walking past their office, and they said, we're going on this trip, and, we know you're a basketball guy. We need someone to sort of come along and help us out on this trip. And I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Of course. No worries. Don't ask me twice. At the time, my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I hadn't even grown. She was, look, to be fair, she was only 3 months pregnant. So she was, it wasn't like she was going to give birth anytime soon. But I said, do you mind if I go on this 5-week trip around America? And she's like, you've got to take this chance. You've got to go for it and see what happens. And, by the end of that trip, I think we were in Miami around Thanksgiving, and the NBA announced they were coming back that season on Christmas Day. And so we got back to Toronto, and I said to the guys, listen, I would love to keep doing the show with you guys. And they said, sure, we want to do the show together. And so we did that. And at around the same time, NBA TV, there was that they already had established some sort of contact with NBA TV for doing content sort of on a weekly or bi-weekly frequency. And then things just developed from there. And it was around 2012, I think it was, where NBA TV said, listen, do you guys want to bring the podcast to NBA TV in Atlanta and do the show there? Yeah.
Wow.
Now, I was like, well, of course, but there's visas and there's moving families. And, like I said, my wife, we just had our first child. And I was just like, oh, my God, is this going to really happen? And things all came together. And so we did the show. We moved down to Atlanta in 2013, and we did the show there for 6 years, which was just because I describe, when people who don't know Australian TV, when they say what was the show like, I say it was kind of like the footy show, kind of like hey it's Saturday as well, like we had, crazy little segments and things like that. And we were sitting around in T-shirts and shirts just talking about NBA, and we went to the finals, we went to the All-Star weekends, we did other little trips here and there. It was just the most incredible experience of my life. And I just couldn't believe I was able to do that. The journey from where I started being a fan back in the late 80s to then being on TV every day in the States talking about basketball was just incredible.
Yeah.
Being such a fan, though, talk about the first time you experienced hanging out with an NBA player. I mean, if you were such a fan, just hang out with those guys. How was that?
Well, so that was pretty amazing when we were walking around the NBA TV offices, and you see Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley and Isaiah Thomas and guys like that. And Isaiah, especially for me, was pretty special because, I'm only 5'10 and a half, 5'11 in shoes. And so when I was a kid, I was always a point guard. And so Isaiah Thomas was one of the guys that I idolized a lot. And so when I saw him around the NBA TV studios, I was like, well, I don't want to be too much of a fanboy here, but I'm also like, holy shit, this is Isaiah Thomas. And so I used to have his posters on my bedroom wall, and Dad kept all those posters. And so Dad sent them over, and he said, decorate the studio with all these old posters you've got. And I was like, sure. And I got the courage up one day, and I said to Isaiah, Isaiah, I just want to show you this Hoop magazine poster that I've got here. This used to hang on my bedroom wall. I used to try to play like you out there, and now we're kind of colleagues. And he was like, oh, that's cool, man. And he signed it, and he signed it. He was like, and then the funny thing was, over time, Isaiah and I, we played a little bit of one-on-one at the finals when we were together.
Yeah, I saw that. That was great.
Oh my God. Like hitting a shot in Isaiah's face was just like, I mean, like that's as close as I'll ever get to winning an NBA championship, But just talking to Isaiah as well. And I would say to him things about his career. And Isaiah, a couple of times he was like, oh yeah. And I would like, no, you did this and your team did that. And it would come back to him. But I was like,
right.
I didn't sort of feel out of my depth then. I was kind of like, I've been waiting probably 20 or 30 years to have this conversation. And then when you do have it, it's pretty easy. So it was such an awesome experience. But that's one example. I mean, we met so many players over the years who either came onto the studio, came into the show. And every time, you sort of had a player who you like idolized or watched, like Kevin McHale, for example, seeing him and just knowing how big a part he was of those incredible Celtics teams. It was always fun just to talk to those guys and to get some stories from them.
Well, you've been out in the field too, and I saw some stuff online as you were doing this interview and some of the stuff that you've been doing. And you got the 3-point shootout with Steph Curry. I think you did something back. You talk about 1989, Kendall Gill. You did some work with
Kendall Gill. He actually beat Kendall Gill, didn't he?
I'm 2-0 all time.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So Kendall Gill's he's a funny one because he didn't come onto our show, but he obviously watched our show because he tagged me in a few of his Instagram posts.
Right.
And on one of our shows, I said, all right, Kendall, let's have a shootout.
Yep.
And so he came to Atlanta for a show. And we went and had a shootout in the NBA TV studio, and I beat him there. And then with the Chicago All-Star Weekend just passed in February, which feels like it was 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
I mean, everything's just so crazy right now. I said, let's, that was on my home court in Atlanta a few years ago. Let's, you're a Chicago guy. Let's go and do it in Chicago. And I beat him there again. So, I mean, that was, but Kendall's a great guy. I mean, he's such like, anytime these guys, give us time and take time out of their day to help us out is so incredible. The thing with Steph Curry, so prior to the All-Star Weekend in 2015, we did a show where we did like the top 20 moments in All-Star game history. And for me, that was really special because, again, I grew up watching the 87 All-Star game, the 88, 89. So I remember those games when they were really, really competitive. And Craig Hodges, I'm sure you played against him sometime, Andrew. He was a great shooter. And he hit 19 in a row one year. Yeah. And Larry Bird, of course, he won the 3. He was obviously great. And one of the things I pointed out was a lot of the guys I thought when they had the rack of the balls to their right, they shot better because it's sort of more a metronomic thing. And so Steph Curry had been in the 3-point shootout 3 times and he hadn't won it. And he won it in 2015.
Yeah.
And someone after he won it said, Steph, you hadn't won this thing before. What was the difference? And he said, well, I was watching NBA TV.
No way.
And he said, I heard that they said, one of the guys was saying, if you put the balls to the right of you, it just gets you into a better flow. So I did that this year and I went on to win it. Now, he didn't say my name, but
but you got to take the credit for it. You got to take the credit.
I'm taking all the credit for that. I'm taking all the credit, And then, so what happened was, every year at the All-Star Weekend, I did the NBA 3-point shootout myself. And so, a couple of times I shot with Kyle Korver. I tried to build it into a little thing where I work out with a player and things like that. And so one year, in fact, it was that year where we were in Los Angeles, and prior to it, I said, I pitched the idea to our bosses, and I said, why don't we go and see if I can get Larry Bird, the greatest shooter, touch man, and see if he can take me through a little routine and see if that helps. And so they pitched that idea, but apparently Larry charges a fortune, or they had something else going. They said, that's not, yeah. And so my one of my colleagues said, he said, why don't we try Steph Curry? You helped him, and we could sell it like that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's Steph Curry. I mean, he's
like Steph Curry.
Exactly. Anyway, so they pitched the idea to the Warriors. We didn't hear for a week or so. And then one night, it was a Wednesday night at like 9 o'clock. My sort of like our producer, he calls me up and goes, hey, the Warriors are in. You're going to San Francisco tomorrow. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, I hope this happens. I hope it happens so bad. Yeah. And then when it does happen, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Yeah, exactly. So I did the show on a Thursday night, and I flew to San Francisco at like 9 o'clock. I arrived there at like, 1 o'clock in the morning. I wake up in the morning and I go to the Warriors practice, and their PR guy, Ray Ritter, one of the greatest PR men you'll ever meet. He's so helpful and such a friendly guy. And I go up to him and I say, and he's like, oh, hey, Lee. And I said, so you know what I'm doing here today? And he's like, refresh my memory. And I'm like, well, I help Steph and I want him to help me. And he's like, okay, you've got 8 minutes with Steph Curry. And I'm like, wow. Oh my God, 8 minutes. Like, yes. It'd take me 5 minutes to sort of tell Steph what the thing is. And anyway, so I went over to Steph and I said, hey, and we had, he knew me. We're not best friends, but he knew who I was, whatever. And I said, so this is the thing, Steph, remember a couple of years ago? And he's like, yeah. And I said, so, I want you to be kind of like Mr. Miyagi to me. See if you can kind of teach me to get to your level. And so he's like, great. And Steph was incredible, like so generous with his time. And so we get over there, and we'd been going for 10 minutes already, shooting away, getting it all set up, putting the cameras on the mics and that. And I'm looking at Ray, he's looking at me. I'm just turning my head so to not make eye contact with him. But then we started doing the shootout, and we're doing these other parts of it. And at the end of it was honestly probably 35, 40 minutes with Steph Curry, just shooting, talking. Wow. Just incredible. Like, as a life experience, it was just incredible. And he was so great. And then eventually, I sort of said, all right, I think I've overstayed my welcome a little bit here. So I packed up and went back to the airport and went back to Atlanta. So I think I spent 12 hours or something like that in San Francisco, shot around with Steph Curry. And
that's amazing.
I hit at one point, I hit 4 in a row, right there with Steph, which is, 4 in a row is not that many to us at the NBA.
It's not that easy though, from NBA range.
From NBA range, especially on that right wing there, I find that to be the hardest spot. So I thought, you know what, that's my claim to fame. I'll tell the kids about that. And it was great. But, one of those opportunities that you can't, it just sort of happened and you enjoy it. And it was just an incredible experience because I know how much the Warriors at that time, they were at the peak of their fandom, and everybody wanted a piece of the Warriors. And for Steph Curry and the Warriors to give me half an hour, 40 minutes of their time, I was incredibly fortunate.
You must be pretty famous over there if you're dealing with all these guys. Now, have you had any dealings with anybody in the bubble, or have you had to go to the bubble at all, or what's going on there?
No, not really, because it's actually, they're pretty strict. They only were letting in one media member per outlet. And the Athletic, we have a guy down there, and then they were switching that out halfway through. So, this was, no one really knew what was going on. I certainly didn't want to go down there for 2 months. I mean, I would have liked to go down there for, a couple of weeks maybe and see what was going on, but I didn't want to be down there. I've got 2 boys as well. And a couple of weeks is fine, but after that, I know I would have been going a bit crazy. And they just didn't want it to be flooded with media. So we're just doing our show daily, kind of just like everybody else, just watching the games and then breaking them down. We've spoken to a few of the other reporters down there. Ben Golliver's a friend of ours, a friend of the show. We've spoken to him. So we're kind of connected, but sort of as connected as you can be without actually being in there. So I don't expect that'll change for the finals. I think this year, everyone's like, you know what, let's just get through this year, I think. I mean, it would be a great experience to go down there for it, but you've got to quarantine for sort of 4 to 10 days, depending on where you've been. And that those guys weren't even allowed out of the hotel room. That was crazy. So, I think, look, we all enjoy a little bit of time away from our kids, but after a while, then you sort of really start missing them as well.
Yeah. Here in Australia, we only get we only see what we see on the news, and it looks like a real crazy time in the United States right now. And with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, the way in which the NBA have sort of been front of center with all the issues and really being a proactive voice in it all. What's your take from the general community there, and how in which the general population is responding to this advocacy which the NBA are putting out there?
Well, you know, what you said off the top was right. It is just insanity here right now because you wake up every day and you think, okay, it can't get any crazier than it was yesterday, and then it gets crazier, and you know, you just it's very sort of depressing and defeating, because you're like, I can't believe things have gotten this bad. I really can't. I mean, there's always going to be two sides, and there's always going to be, you know, disagreements, but it's gotten to the point where it's like, I can't believe some of the things that are being defended and being said. And you know, so that part of it has been tough to deal with. And on the basketball court, I have to say, I'm very happy that I am a basketball person and I'm connected with the NBA, because I think Adam Silver has really shown he's a progressive leader.
Yes,
and I think that's what's really important, because you're seeing from the other side now, people are saying, oh, the NBA is too political. I'm not watching this crap. Just play basketball. And it's like, that is missing the point so badly right now.
For sure.
Everyone's got the right to express their opinion, and no one is just one thing. You know, if you say, hey, you're just a basketball player, entertain me. Well, screw you. You know what I mean? Like that's not what it's about. These players have an enormous platform. These players have the opportunity to really express themselves. And I like the way that they've done that by acknowledging Black Lives Matter. That is the key point here, because black men and black women daily have to put up with the sort of fear and knowledge that they might just get murdered for virtually no reason. You know, I don't know if you guys saw Robert Horry last week. He was talking about what it's like for him. And he was, so it was a really moving thing that he said on the sports spectrum out there in LA. And now he's got a son, I think, who's 14, and he's saying, listen, I just want you to come home and don't resist, don't fight, don't do anything. And if the police beat you, that's okay. Just make sure they don't shoot you. I know. And I was like, how has it gotten to the point where you're almost accepting that your child or children might get beaten up? That's okay.
It's heartbreaking.
You know,
it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. You know, and I just find that it's repulsive, to be honest, as well. So, you know, the fact that the NBA, you know, in the face of, again, people on the right sort of saying, oh, the ratings are terrible, no one's watching the NBA, you're turning everybody off. The fact that Adam Silver has basically said, we don't care about that. The message here is there's something far more important here than worrying about TV ratings. And that is standing up for what's right.
Great.
You know, and I know myself on Twitter and any social media platform, I get people saying just absurd things to me, defending, you know, like Black Lives, just a political movement, it's divisive. And I'm like, what's happened in these people's lives where they think that the color of your skin determines what type of person you are? You know, I just
it's gone too far. It's basically gone too far. It really has. It has. And you know, it's not going to change with the current leadership, you know, because when you've got the biggest voice, racist, homophobic, you know, like, and then you've got the people supporting him. I just, like I say, I'm a positive, optimistic, hopeful person. I always believe that, you know what, things are, you know, not as bad as they seem, but it doesn't feel like that right now. You know, you're in the thick of things. You're in the thick of things being in Atlanta, because Atlanta, the city is sort of Democratic and the state's sort of Republic. So they're going at it, I'm sure.
Exactly. Like, so I do live right in the heart here of Atlanta. So you do see the Democratic side, but you only need to go 20 minutes out of the city and it's a completely different country. And again, it's not about trying to convince people to become Republican or Democrat. For me, it's like, what are just your core values as a person? Like, how does this person not deserve exactly the same rights as this other?
Humanity.
Exactly. Empathy for other people. Like, the other big thing, and I'm sure you guys, you know, especially you, Leonard, know here, like with the medical system here, it's just insane. Like, you know, like no one, I just don't think anyone would deny anybody else the right to get medical treatment if they require it. But over here, it's like, if you don't have medical insurance, then they just shrug their shoulders.
That's right.
They shrug their shoulders. And even if you do,
they'll wish you good luck and say, have a nice day.
That's right.
But they may, unless you've got the loot, they may not provide any assistance.
Well, and the funny thing is here, so, you know, my wife works and I work full time and we have full medical insurance for our family and both our boys.
even when I take my sons to the doctor or when I go to the doctor, even with full medical insurance, it's incredible how many things I'm just not quite covered for. You know, you're just $116 for that and $38 for this. And I'm, you know, like we pay it. We are very fortunate because we have two incomes. We are able to meet our expenses. But I know there are, you know, majority of people here either can't or struggle to. And I, you know, I have so much empathy for those people because you're like, this is just crazy and it could easily be solved. But so, yeah, it's a crazy time, but I'm very proud of the NBA for standing strong during all this and not giving in and saying, you know what, this is more important. I don't know if you guys saw Jamal Murray last night after he had another.
Yeah, hey, you know what? I say this. As spectacular of a performance he put on the floor, for me and my values, I thought it was as good or if not better. That 2.5 minutes post-game interview and the way in which he expressed himself was something very
And he
special.
didn't say a lot. It was sort of his reaction.
But it was so meaningful.
Yeah, I agree. That was it. It was like you could feel like what it meant to him right now, you know, and he has it on his shoes there. And he's Canadian too. Let's not forget Jamal Murray is a Canadian, you know, so everybody, again, I think, you know, you just have to be a normal, it sounds crazy to say, but a normal, decent human being be right now where it's like, you know, American history, you know, it's been 400 years where black people have basically been treated like second-class citizens, and all the movement is trying to be right now is like, let's just bring everybody up to the same level. And you've got people saying, well, that's,
hang on a second.
Yeah. Like, well, back up. Let's talk about it here. Now, you know, again, I'm a white guy. Okay. So throughout my life, I've been able to move freely through countries, get jobs without too many problems. And I can basically walk the street without worrying that someone's just going to, like a police officer anyway, is going to gun me down. My wife is from Peru. Okay. So she's Latin American. Now in Toronto, she was walking around there without any cares in the world. But in the last few years here in Atlanta, she's definitely noticed a change where people kind of judge you and sort of, you know, and so you guys know what it's like, you know, when you're married, when your wife is hurting, you're hurting and your whole family's hurting. And it's something that you, again, as a white person, to me, it's like, well, I've never felt that just in daily life. So now I'm sort of, I'm learning from this situation and I'm growing and I'm like, well, this is just unacceptable that anybody has to feel that way. But again, this thing is not going to change tomorrow. It's not going to change overnight, but hopefully this is at least the beginning of something.
Yeah.
Your boys, how old are they? Are you any plans on bringing them back to Australia?
Well, so I have an 8-year-old and a soon-to-be 4-year-old. We were actually in Australia this time last year. We just got back, which is good timing because if we delayed that trip for a year, we probably wouldn't have been able to make it. Yeah, it's interesting. I you know, my life and my career is here right now, and it, you know, the job's great. You know, life is okay. I would love to get back to Australia at some point, but I'm not, you know, sort of not on the calendar anytime soon either. It's one of those things. Like I originally left home 22 years ago. I think I was a 23-year-old kid to go backpacking across Europe. I thought I'd be gone for 6 weeks or 6 months, and here I am 22 years later living in Atlanta. So, you know, these things don't always, you don't plan these things, they kind of happen. But you know, last year when we were back, you know, my 8-year-old, who's not a big sports guy, he's kind of into it, but he's kind of not. He actually sort of took to the AFL a bit, which I was like, yes, come on. So I enjoyed that, but like I say, we sort of we haven't really got a plan to go back to Australia, but I also sort of think maybe it would happen too in a couple of years' time. Who knows? You know, because obviously growing up there, I would love to go back there, especially to see my dad, who's still alive there. So the boys to grow up around grandpa, and I've got my brother there. He's got a couple of kids, so I'd love the cousins to grow up together. One thing about being in Atlanta, we don't have a lot of visitors in Atlanta. People, you know, when people travel to the US, they go to LA and New York, and,
of course,
Miami, Chicago. Not a lot of people coming through Atlanta. So when they do come through, God, you give them the biggest hug as if you haven't seen anyone for years. But also as well for my boys, this is home for them. So you know, they don't, you know, to them, this is just where they grow up and where they live. So they're not sort of like, oh, Dad, can we go and live in Australia? They've got their friends here and they go to school and they're not going to school at the moment. It's all virtual, of course, but right. This is to them, this is normal. So it's I don't want to move for selfish reasons. I sort of hope if the opportunity's right and, we can get work and things like that, that maybe we could move back at one point.
What do you make of the game? Copes and I, a couple of episodes ago, we spoke about the Houston Rockets in particular and the reliance on the three ball and the transition that the game has made. And you might see this a little ironic, but for me, I think that it's sort of been a little bit too skewed that way. And sometimes, as much as I respect the athletes, the aesthetic of the game is not the same as what it used to be. And then you see a performance like we did the other day with Donovan Mitchell and Jamal Murray, and just the shooting was just incredible. And you go, well, if it's like this all the time, I can live with it. How do you feel that the trend of the game, the 5 out, spread the floor, get to the rim or shoot the three, how do you feel that has impacted the game and the interest in the game?
It's tough because I think if you look at the Warriors when they kind of exploded in 2014, 2015, when Steph and Clay started just hitting shots from everywhere, it was awesome. It was like, wow, look at these guys. This range is incredible. But now it's kind of, almost every team has one guy like that or two guys like that, and they're all just out shooting threes. And it definitely... There are times where I'm like, man, this is, like the Rockets, I think hit or shot 57 and then 59 threes in back-to-back games against the Thunder, but they lost them both.
Yeah.
And to me, the problem was, like, when those shots are falling for the Rockets, they often win those games and they score 140 points and it's fine. But if they don't have a plan B, then it's like, honestly, you're just shooting without any real, like,
plan.
Yeah, it's like, let's just hope they go in.
And some are bad shots as well.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Some of them are terrible. And so one of the things I brought up on our show, I said, listen, I understand if the Rockets hit 8 in a row to start the second half. I think it was game 3 against the Thunder. I was like, looks great. But then when they started missing, they just kept shooting. And it's like, drive the ball in, move the ball around, give someone else a look. Because I think ultimately you hit those 8 threes and you think you're just not going to miss any more. But it ended up costing them the game. Yeah. And we've seen the Rockets in the playoffs. Games have been lost because they're too stubborn for their own good, I think, and James Harden can get to the paint. He's got that great big body, he can get in there and get past his opponents. But I find that he's kind of like, what, I'm just going to keep firing away here, and he'll take 17 or 18 threes in a game. And I mean, I don't want to sound like an old man, but there are times I'm like, just move that ball, like the Greg Popovich Spurs, just get that ball moving around to get a better look. And a 2-pointer is better than a brick 3-pointer. And so it's, but James Harden, he's another one. He's a very polarizing player because he's incredibly talented. He's a 3-time MVP runner-up. He's a 1-time MVP. But the embellishment at times, where he goes in and he's flopping all over the place and he hits, or he takes 22 free throws in a game. You're like, this is not fun to watch. He doesn't need to do it. So I would like to see a little bit less of it. But of course, the way the game is right now, it's like everyone's got to shoot threes. You see Brook Lopez, he's added a couple of years to his career, I think, because he's able to shoot the three. So I don't know how Mark Bradkey or any of those guys, John Dorge, would go in the current game. But yeah, exactly. I don't know if those.
The big Coke cans shooting the threes.
But I think as well, like, probably the big guys look at the guards and the forwards like you guys, and like they get all the shots. So I'm gonna learn to work on my 3-point game. So they go outside and start shooting a few away. But the funniest thing is as well, I remember seeing Andrew Bogut and Anderson Varejao at the finals a few years ago, kind of having a bit of a shootout at the end of a shoot around. And Andrew Bogut knocked in 8 or 9 in a row as well. Like professional players, as you guys know, like all of them can shoot the three. It's just different in a game, of course. Yep. But it's pretty remarkable seeing, like now almost everyone can shoot a three. So that's where the game's going. But yeah, when they're going in, it's fine. But a couple of times, like I get frustrated watching the Rockets when I'm like, surely Mike D'Antoni's like, all right, guys, let's have a pick and roll. Someone just go to the basket. Just get a 2-point. Let's just move the ball inside the 3-point line for a couple of possessions in a row.
And now I'm a Clippers fan, and Andrew Gaze follows the LeBron James Lakers.
Well, I get it right. Yeah. I'm a Spurs fan, but in these playoffs,
you think the Lakers are going to win this year?
I do. I think the Lakers.
Who do you think is going to win? Tell us why.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think things have changed a little bit in the bubble. You know, coming in, I was like, I think the Bucks, based on what we had seen throughout the regular season, I thought the Bucks are pretty good. Defensively, they're fantastic, and then offensively, no one could really stop Giannis. But the bubble hasn't been great for the Bucks. I don't think they've played their best basketball. I know they're playing the Heat right now. I'm not sure how that one's going, but I think the Lakers also didn't play all that well in those regular season resumption games, but they also didn't have a lot to play for. You know, they kind of wrapped up the number 1 seed. So, you know, LeBron wasn't going to go full speed. And against the Blazers, you know, they lost that first game and then kind of turned up the heat a little bit and wrapped that up in 5. And the Clippers, I don't think they were expecting to go 6 against the Mavericks. You know, I think Luka kind of surprised them there. So I definitely have been more impressed with the Clippers to this point. I think ultimately, I mean, but then when I look at Anthony Davis and the way that he can play and the way that he closed out that series against the Blazers, and then of course LeBron, I mean, you're never going to write off LeBron. It'd be crazy even at 35. But I just wonder about a couple of guys. Danny Green, how reliable is he? We know he can get hot, but he tends to go games where he's pretty cold.
Well, he goes missing. Missing.
Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's another one. It's like sometimes I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I'd want him out there. Rondo's been injured. He's not. I don't know what his current status is right now. Avery Bradley's not even there, who's another good defender for the Lakers. Kuzma's been really good for them. I like Kuzma. But I think when I look at, but then again, you look at the Clippers, Paul George hasn't really done too much to this point. Patrick Beverley's been injured. You know, they're a couple of their really good defenders. I like Montrezl Harrell. He's a good, he's a good big man. He hustles. He works hard at both ends. But Kawhi, I mean, in these last few games, Kawhi has just been, so incredibly efficient and reliable. And I think I'd give the Clippers, I'd have them ahead right now. But again, LeBron and Anthony Davis, if those two guys are the best players in the series, then the Lakers would win a series against the Clippers. So I'm sort of hedging. I'm not really giving you a great answer here, but, I just sort of, I would say the Clippers I would have slightly ahead right now, but, it's going to be an incredible battle out of those two. I have to say, though, I think the Celtics, just right now, things are pretty well set up for them as well. Considering Gordon Hayward's not, he's going to be out for a couple more weeks. If they can get past the Raptors and then get Gordon Hayward back and potentially play the Heat or the Bucks, I mean, the Celtics, that's a very good team with Kemba there. They've got obviously Jalen and Jason who can both get you 20, and then you got Marcus Smart who plays defense. He can hit the 3 as well. So, and then Hayward adds another 20 points and pretty solid defense. So the only real weakness for the Celtics is in the middle there with Tice is okay. And Enes Kanter's okay, but that's their only real weakness. Other than that, I mean, the Celtics are just quietly, cruising along. They beat Philadelphia pretty easily in that series, and they've got themselves in a good spot here against the Raptors.
Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned, because we did our little predictions before it all started, and we both picked a dark horse, and one that really no one speaks about that I reckon is also a sneaky chance is playing some decent basketball as well. Don't have the same level of superstar, but the Miami Heat are just playing well. But, hey, you mentioned before about flopping, and we did a segment on flopping last week, and I don't know whether it's because there's no fans or I don't know whether it's just me noticing it more, but in the last sort of 3 months, in the NBA, so the tail end of the season before they went to their hiatus and during the bubble, I've seemed to notice a lot more flopping. In fact, I saw some of your tweets. You tweeted out one about House Jr. from the Houston Rockets, and I subsequently noticed that it's not there anymore. I didn't know whether you took it down or someone told you to take it down or what the go is. But is your perception the same as mine? Do you feel like there is? Because some of them are horrendous. And here in Australia, we're going through it with the AFL. Right now, the narrative out there is that this flopping is ruining the game, and there's a big narrative going on about flopping in the AFL. And I get a sense that it's like that in the NBA. Is that just me, or are you noticing it as well?
Yeah, well, so we actually talked about it on our show as well. I said, I said, I think there's less sort of in transition flopping. And by that, I mean, you know, like Chris Paul sometimes where he, you know, he gets touched and he dives all over the ground. I think there's less of that. But I think what you still will always see in basketball, when a guy's trying to take a charge in the paint and he gets hit and boom, he goes down to try to sell it. So I think you're seeing more of that. Now, that tweet you referred to that I did put up with Daniel House and I took it down. So the reason I took it down, when I look back at it, he appeared to, like one of his feet, I think it was his left foot, he kind of rolled it.
No, mate. Don't, no. We've watched it. We dissected. That was just blatant. He didn't even get hit. He didn't, like, well, me and Copes had an argument, and I said, well, it's going to happen forever and a day where you embellish contact. Yeah. You know, and you can sort of live with some of that, except for the extreme. There was not even any contact.
Well, so Chris Paul, I think it was, kind of gives him a little nudge, nothing much, but then you see that sort of slow-mo and then he rolls back like that. And so someone did mention to me, he said, you know, look at his foot there. And so I looked at it and I'm like, I don't think so, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt here. And so I tend to be someone, I'm like, you know what, live with your tweets, good or bad.
Look at it again. I need to look at it again.
You sort of like, you know, because everyone's had a bad tweet and you want to take it back, but sometimes you just got to live with them as long as it's not offensive in any way. But I thought I'll give him the benefit of the doubt just in case. I mean, he didn't miss any time, so his ankle was fine. It wasn't like he was carted off or anything like that. But I thought, all right. Maybe I was in a good mood. I was feeling generous that day. But, you know, the one thing that we do, you know, I talk about and I hate is when, and I love Chris Paul. I think he's an incredible athlete, incredible player. But when he does that dribble, and then he just goes sideways into the guy coming from behind, and then he
draws a foul. Yeah, he's trying to draw a foul. Yeah,
I can't stand that.
It's ugly. You know, it's ugly. It's ugly. Part of the game.
It's ugly. And now, look, there's always veteran moves out there, but that one is just like the cheapest, dirtiest way to pick up a foul. And I'm like, that he doesn't need to do that. Chris Paul, he's a basketball genius, and it's just tacky when he does it, and he's still doing it in what, year 15 or 16 or whatever it is for him, and so that disappoints me a little bit. But again, you know, the embellishment in the lane, you know, when a guy hits you, try to sell the contact. That's just part of it, because if you stand there and a guy hits you, they're just never going to call that as a charge. You know? And the other thing with the charge is I mean, I've been watching basketball now for over 30 years. I still don't know what a charge is and what it isn't, because there are times you see guys sliding their foot, moving, and they call it a charge. And I'm like, when I was a kid playing in Sunbury, it was like, you basically cannot move, you know, feet on the ground. You've got to be there. And if the guy hits you, then you might get the charge call. But now you're like, oh, yeah, he was just sliding into position while the guy was in the air. And I'm like, that can't be a charge. It just can't be. But it's the same with travel, though, in the NBA. You just see what travels are. I mean, you know, you see LeBron sometimes just go for a stroll.
3 or 4 steps before he puts the ball down,
Exactly. And then there's other guys who kind of, you know, use their pivot foot. And they're, you know, but you're guy 10 on the roster, so that's a travel. You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But LeBron is. So it's always funny when you know, you something like that happens on Twitter, and people are like, you know, what do you know? How do you not know the rules of the game? And I want to say to them, like, you know what? I don't think I do know the rules of the game, because sometimes these are called and other times they're not, and I have no idea which one's right anymore.
Lee, quick question. What do you think about the Brett Brown sacking? Did you have much?
Well, I thought he was unlucky, but I thought it was going to happen too if they got swept. I thought the only way he could keep his job if they got through to the second round. But look, he went to a situation, and you know, this whole trust the process with Philadelphia, for me, if you look, they got Simmons and Embiid out of it. Okay, very good players, no doubt. But you look at like Nerlens Noel and Michael Carter-Williams, and there's someone else I'm forgetting in those early days, Jahlil Okafor, that's one.
Yeah.
Like, how can you succeed, and both of you guys must know this as well, how can you succeed in an environment when the franchise isn't even trying to win? You know, how does that help your growth and development? You're a rookie, you make it into the NBA, and the franchise is basically like, we're tanking for the next 2 or 3 years. So we don't want you to be good. We don't want you to excel. And Jahlil Okafor, in college at Duke, I think he could score the ball. No problems at all. He had, you know, defensively he wasn't great, but that's fine. Young guy coming in, you got to learn those things. And now I don't even think he's in the league. And again,
Fultz is probably the biggest example of #1 pick, and they traded up to get him.
Yeah.
So they went through that process and it doesn't work out.
Yeah, Colangelo made a terrible deal. They could have had Jason Tatum, you know, and if they get Jason Tatum, Brett Brown is probably still coaching that team. So I think, Brett Brown went into that situation and he couldn't win for those first 3 or 4 years. He starts putting together a couple of 50-win seasons, and that fit with Embiid and Ben Simmons is clunky. I don't know which coach is going to figure out what to do, because if Ben Simmons doesn't learn to shoot properly, then it's going to be a problem. They both kind of overlap and they play on top of each other. So I think Brett Brown, I don't know if he gets another job. I would like to see him get another job, because I think he's a great coach and he's a fun guy. A funny story with Brett Brown too is that in San Antonio, I met him when he was an assistant with the Spurs, and we were talking about Australia and all those things, and then a couple of years later, I saw him at the Summer League at Vegas, and I went up to him and said, "Oh, hey Brett," when he was coaching Philadelphia, I said, "Lee Ellis here," and he was kind of like, he was a bit like,
who are you?
Yeah, he couldn't remember me, and so I jogged his memory there, and we started talking some more, and he was like, "Okay, yeah." And then the next year, I saw him again, and I was like, "Hey, Brett, Lee Ellis." The same thing. He's like, and it became a running joke where for about 3 or 4 years in a row, I went up to Brett Brown, had to introduce myself to him every time, and he didn't have a clue what it was. So, yeah. But for me as well, growing up watching you guys and Brett coaching and Cecil Exum and Dave Simmons, and now Jared Utoff is he's on a team now. Like it's so crazy to me to see these kids of former players.
Yes.
Having big role. I mean, Dante Exum, his career is obviously a bit of the crossroads right now. Hopefully he can figure things out there. He's had some injury problems, but, seeing Ben Simmons out there as a rookie of the year and a star player, an all-star player, and 4th in defensive player of the year voting, Brett Brown, who used to coach the Tigers or the Giants there. Yeah. Like, I'm just like, this is like, it's like I've, been in the time machine, and I'm like, things have sort of changed from Melbourne, but they're now just in America, and I'm seeing these guys that I used to sort of see around Australia, and it's incredible. But it's also great for Australian basketball. I love that. I love the fact that we have developed a lot of players who have come over here and had varying levels of success. I mean, someone like Matthew Dellavedova, he played a role on those on the Cavs championship team. That's just so great to see, and just a great sign for Australian basketball. And hopefully we see more of it in the coming years.
Hey, you've been fantastic with your time. I won't keep you too much longer, but one of the challenges is for Australians when you go to the United States, and I had it when you get over there, you've got to – we both speak English. Both countries speak English, but it's a different type of English. And even yesterday I saw that Mark Leishman, the golfer, was out there and he was telling the journo, he says, "Oh, mate, I've got to have a blinder in the next one in order to get through." And the guy, "Hey, now a blinder. What's a blinder?" I mean, like, have you had any issues or challenges with the language in order to be understood?
Yeah, all the time. Not so much in Canada. It was a little bit different, but down here in Atlanta in the South, it's a completely different language. I mean, Leonard, yourself, like I'm sure it was the
100%.
Same for you when you get to Australia. You're talking a language and people are like, "What the hell is this guy talking about here?" But the funniest thing that still I get a laugh out of is the American thing when you're cheering for a team or a player, you're rooting for them. Anytime someone says, who you're rooting for,
that's a level of commitment that we're not normally accustomed to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow. So that's always funny to me. So now I try to use that to, because you try to speak the local language, but I'm also like, no, I know this is my Australian audience is going to appreciate this. The funniest thing I think down here in the South is you've got the Southern drawl and the accent. Everyone, "Hey, y'all," and all that. And so you start to pick it up. And I see it really in my 8-year-old son, because he's got an Australian dad, a Peruvian mum.
Wow.
He was born in Toronto. He's going to school in Atlanta.
Oh, my goodness.
His accent, sometimes when I've picked him up at school, he's saying things and he's got this twang and he's doing this. And then he sort of gets in the car with me and then he kind of comes back to his almost Australianisms with me. So I sort of sometimes just hold my son and I say, if you end up with just the weirdest sort of accent, I apologize, but that's just the way it is with him. So, but it's funny because even a couple of his friends, I know if he's like, for example, I mean, whenever he gets back to school, because they've been out of school since March here.
Yeah.
So he's been spending so much more time around me. So his accent naturally kind of, comes back to my accent. So it's going to be interesting when he gets back to school and he sees his friends again, and he's probably going to say a few words, and it's going to be a bit troubling for him. But he's slowly, in the last few years, especially going to Australia, he started to put the pieces together a little bit more about, our situation and how he ended up here. And he's kind of like, oh, well, okay. He's got 3 passports, so he's not complaining too much.
There you go.
Hey, last one. So we put it down that you're either a Bucks or Lakers for the title.
No. He said Clippers are. Slow down, pal. Clippers are going to be better than the Lakers. Don't even try that. All right?
I thought he said.
Man, you better clean your ears out.
All right. Well, the Bucks and the Clippers for the title. When it comes to the MVP, who's your? If you actually might get to cast a vote. If you're casting a vote, who gets the nod there?
I picked Giannis this year. I think just on both ends of the floor, he was incredible. He won the Defensive Player of the Year. A week or so ago, they announced that.
Yeah.
And he puts up just some incredible, 36 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists, 4 blocks. He hits a couple of threes. His team wins. Because that's the thing about Giannis is his numbers this year were incredible, but he actually did it in like some of the fewest minutes ever because the Bucks just blew teams out. Yeah. But what I like about him is on the defensive end, you see him get dunked on a few times, but he's going after everything. Yeah. So he creates defensive opportunities by just being so athletic and so long. And, when you see him in person, it's like, how is this guy? Because, when I grew up playing basketball, there was a kid sometimes who was 6'2", 6'3", and they couldn't dribble. They were uncoordinated and, they're almost made fun of. So when you see a guy, Giannis, at 6'11", and he's the most athletic guy as well, and he can jump and his arms are so long, it's like, this guy he is literally a freak out there. Yeah. So for him to do all those things, the 3-point shot is still coming, but man, if he develops a sort of 35, 40% 3-point shot, he's going to be unguardable. Yeah, he's going to be Kevin Durant, a more athletic Kevin Durant, which is insane. So I think it's Giannis. I think LeBron probably finishes second this year because he had a bounce back year for sure. But Giannis, I don't think there was anyone who was better across the board on both ends of the floor than him. And, I would like to see the Bucks go on and win the championship. It'd be great. It'd a great story for a great city and a great team, especially as well, going back to what we're talking about with the Black Lives Matter, a lot of that instigated from last week, the shooting there in Kenosha, Wisconsin. So it'd be a great story for that city. But Giannis is, he's a great athlete, a great player. And, he only started playing basketball, 10 years ago or something, which is actually really annoying. I've been playing since I was 5 years old, and I never got to sniff the NBA. And he just decided to pick it up one day, and he's an MVP. So it's like, screw you, Giannis.
Making plenty of money, pal. Making plenty of money too.
Don't feel too bad when you're 5'10" and perhaps not the greatest athlete, as opposed to a 6'10" Adonis that looks like he's been chiseled out of marble. He's got some assets that not everyone has. But you're right, he is a sensation. But Lee, it's been an absolute delight to be able to spend some time with you. For our Australian audiences and those that tune into this podcast, and as we said from the start, there's dozens of them. All right. So for those of them that actually do tune in, they can catch you on No Dunks. I've seen a lot of it on YouTube. But is that the main platform to catch your show?
Yeah, so you can get it on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Athletic website. You can basically get it anywhere you download a podcast. And we do the show daily live on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern US time. So I think that's probably midnight East Coast Australia time for now. Right. And that's great because the live show is great. You get you get people tuning in with comments and things like that. It's been great. I really, it's been a real big thrill for me to talk to you guys. I know we met a couple of years ago in Vegas. Hang
on, just on that, because hopefully it was just for theatre, because we showed a clip a little earlier of you and of that interview you did with me in Las Vegas during the Summer League. That's when Copes and I were part of the Sydney Kings in the coaching staff. And we were asking questions, or the host of the show asked a question about the greatest all-time player coming out of Australia.
No, the question was the best player
coming out of Australia.
Yeah.
And you momentarily either lost your mind or you're just trying to lose. You saw Copes out of the corner of your eye.
Listen.
I know you guys had you played together for a long time, won a couple of championships, but I think we all know that Leonard carried you there for a while.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate it. I love you, brother. I love you, brother.
I think you could shoot the three. Let's be fair, you could shoot the three. But if it wasn't for Leonard catching all those alley-oops, you probably wouldn't have had more than 2 assists a game. So
playing defense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how many times did you have to save his backside on a backdoor cut there, Leonard? You know.
I made him who he is today, brother.
We might have to just send over a few of our games so you can reassess that judgment. But no, we really appreciate your time. And the other thing we admire, we have a lot of Australians that go over to the States that they might only be in transit, or they might only be there for a couple of months, and they come back and they've got their full-blown American twang. You've been living a lifetime over there, and you still sound as dicky die as Aussie as the next Australian down the street. So kudos for you for being able to maintain that, because it's not easy, as we said, with the language issues, but you've done a magnificent job. You've done Australia proud with what you've been doing. Keep doing it, and we enjoy listening and watching you, and good luck for whatever lies ahead, and hopefully we see another great final series in the NBA.
Yes, same here. I hope that's the thing. The basketball has been great down in the bubble, and I hope it continues to be that way. And thanks very much for having me, guys. This has been honestly a great thrill, great fun, and it's always good just talking basketball with people who actually understand what I'm saying for a change. So I think that's part of the reason why I've lasted so long over here. People don't really know what I'm saying, and they're like, they feel sorry for me, so they're like, let's just leave that guy here. But it's great. I mean, it's funny. So I obviously don't really follow the AFL as closely anymore. You see the scores and things, but they do have the grand final on over here in Atlanta, in a bar just not too far away. So that's the one day of the year where I get together with some other Aussies, and it's always pretty funny when you hear the accent again and people talking about Australian rules and just Australian stuff. So outside of that, this is the most Australian I've spoken for a while. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, it's been a delight for us, and good luck.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
This has been a No Filter Media production.
Say what you want.